Hey, Deserving listeners, it's time to watch 90 Day Fiancé. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. You really do. Let's watch.
Coben, you want to hang out with Lala today? Yeah. Uh-oh. Honey, just let him be.
Oh my goodness.
I didn't react to last week's episode publicly on the internet because, I don't know, I just didn't feel like I had much to say. But I do have something to say about this. But before getting into this, I should bring people up to speed. Some people don't even watch the show and they just watch these reaction videos. So they thought they might be pregnant. They went to the drugstore, bought a couple pregnancy tests, went into the bathroom at the drugstore, and both came out positive that she's pregnant with a second child. And they had a long conversation in the car about their birth control methods, and it sounded like he was using the withdrawal method, but it wasn't necessarily working every time. And she also said, or they said that one time, or maybe a number of times, they didn't actually withdraw because she said she didn't believe she was ovulating at the time, which is a ridiculous notion. I mean, in 2022 or whenever this was recorded, people still don't understand the statistics. I mean, it's on the internet. Like, just Google it, right? Or are people in weird parts of the internet where there's a bunch of misinformation, which, can't happen. And even if, say, there's a 5% chance given a particular method, it's still 5%. It's 1 in 20. So I don't want to shame them in that way. I'm just surprised because they're stressed out about it. Naturally, they are failing at family planning. And there were, I think, easy ways to avoid it that plenty of people will use anyway. So they are pregnant and they are upset. There was a number of elements to it. One was that Emily was like, I don't want to tell my family, and which is fine. I mean, you can keep it private, but it is a big deal to the parents because they are supporting the two of them and the grandchild. The couple and the child is living with the parents, and the parents are very concerned about the two of them being independent financially. And if they're going to have another child, that will throw a serious wrench in that because it's more expensive for everyone. But also, it means that Emily, work-wise, might have some difficulty. I don't know exactly what her occupation is. They rarely go into it, honestly. It always kind of surprises me because it seems like a major element, right? Like, we almost never see the individuals at work doing their work. And that's, I don't know, it'd be good to have just like a couple scenes or a couple little vignettes about what they actually do for us to get a flavor. Anyway, so for the two of them, it'd be fine if they wanted to keep it private for a while. She's like, well, I'll wait until I'm showing, and that's fine. But it's, I think, lying by omission to the parents because it's a very hot topic in the family, and the parents could feel legitimately hurt by that. And it is also kind of an immature move, right? Because the parents have had particularly the dad, very explicit conversations with the two of them, particularly Emily, of do not get pregnant again. And the way that those conversations were going, it seemed as though the dad knew that Emily wasn't responsible, I think, in general, and thus would need that kind of strong message, right? Because it would be obvious. If you wouldn't need to tell someone that information. Anyone in Emily's position, for the most part, particularly if you didn't want to have kids right away, another kid right away, you would, of course, know that you should take precautions around getting pregnant. But I think Emily, and there's been other statements around her being irresponsible and being spoiled-ish and being immature, childish. So we're seeing some results of that. Now, if you're ever in this situation as a parent and you have a grown adult that is acting like a child, what do you do about it? I've worked with many families on this issue, and I've talked about it before, but in brief, sometimes your methods at trying to help actually are keeping the adult child in a childish position, or at the very least, you're not helping them to stretch their wings. And sometimes, like with Emily, like if I was talking with the parents And I never know exactly what's going to work, and it depends on the goal. But if the parents came to me and said, we want Emily out of our house, but we also don't want to destroy her life, and we also don't want to alienate her, and we also don't want to harm our grandchild. And I would say, okay, well, that's rational. What's the timeline? And they'd be like, well, because I would always ask that. Because if we're talking like 5 years, then that's one timeline. Or if we're talking about like 1 month, and often that was the case when parents, like her parents would come to me, they'd be like, I need them out now. And so, okay. And sometimes there's a little bit of flexibility there because of a number of reasons. And one of the reasons why I would say is there flexibility is because often parents will put their foot down, but they won't follow through, which means that the Emilys of the world, the next time you put your foot down and draw a boundary and draw a limit, provide a potential consequence by a particular date, set a deadline, the Emilys of the world will be like, well, you've done that before, so there's some wiggle room there. And you don't want the Emilys of the world thinking there's wiggle room because they'll make use of that. And if there is no wiggle room, then you will end up kicking them out of the house, and they'll be like, wait, so you were serious? And you don't want that. So what I would tell people is, in the parent's position, is what's the real deadline? Like how long would it be until you would say, absolutely, I'm gonna, because the other thing I would introduce to the parents is you have to have a date, at least in your mind, maybe communicated to the adult child, that you were going to kick them out, because that is the ultimate consequence. And sometimes to the adult parents, I would say, are you willing to do that? Are you really think about that? Because it might not come to that, but it might. And as you talk with your child, your adult child, about what your expectations are, that is one of the only things you can really do as a consequence. Because you can't ground your 20-something-year-old child, right? Now you might take money away, right? You might say, I'm going to stop giving you money, that kind of thing. So that's another thing. There's only a few things you can do to someone like Emily. You can kick them out. And even that's kind of hard, because what if they refuse to leave? Like, do you call the cops? Again, it doesn't usually come to that, but those are conversations that I have. And also, are you willing to not fund your child? Are you willing to completely cut off any kind of money? Because I ask the parents that, because I ask them to visualize that in their head, because for a lot of parents, they just can't do that. I can't kick my child out. It's too much for me. And that's okay. But we need to know that, because we don't want to introduce that as a possible consequence if you're not going to follow through on it. So we have to get very realistic about what the actual consequences you're willing to impose. And then once we have those list of consequences, then we develop a timeline. And usually it's, especially if I see situations like this where I don't think there have been any hard limits given to Emily around this. And so often it would be like 6 months. So you tell Emily, you think about Colt and Debbie, actually. Colt had a similar timeline with Debbie. He was like, look, in his head, he's like, I want you out now. Me and Vanessa want you out now. But I'll give you 3 months, which is more than enough time for Debbie to find her own place. So, something like that. So say 6 months, especially if kids. Or maybe even you set the date after the other child is born, say 8 months from now. So you say 12 months from now, or, well, I don't know, that'd be hard. If I were the parents, I would say 4 months, maybe 5, and then settle in, have the second child, and, move on from there. But anyway, so you give that consequence, 5 months, to Emily, and you say, here's the timeline. On this date, no matter what, you're out. And I don't want to talk about evicting you or calling the cops or anything. Let's just work together on this. But 5 months, I feel like that's more than enough time. And by the way, I love you and I will help you. But I think this is not only good for you, because I think you need to grow up, but also me and, us as your parents, we're kind of done. We've parented our kids and we want to move on to the next phase. We want to be the grandparents that visit or babysit the kids. We don't want to have to deal with more and more people in our house. Like originally it was just you, and then you bring a child in, and now it's Kobe, and we love you all, but at a certain, I would hope that at one time for you and Kobe, Emily, that your kids move out of the house and enjoy their own life. So anyway, 6 months, 5 months or something, and here's the timeline. So of course you understand this, and this is another part that I talk with the parents about, is like the tone at which you talk to the adult child has a large effect on the dynamic. Because if you talk down to them and talk to them like they're an idiot or assume they're incompetent, then they tend to think of themselves as incompetent. Children, adult children, people they act how they're treated. In fact, a very powerful research finding among multiple studies is that with kids, when you tell them, like one of the research findings that we have is that when you have young children, regardless of gender, and you just give them a math test, there's no difference in gender. But if you say to the class, just like 2 sentences, something along the lines of, boys are better at math than girls, something like that, and then you just give them the test, the girls on average will score lower. So we act, and you just imagine that's just one sentence. So imagine being told that all the time, messaging. The Barbie doll that says, math is hard, or is that how it goes? And so all those messages around gender and ethnicity and age and, all these class, and also within a family. I think Emily thinks of herself in comparison to her sister as the free spirit / irresponsible one. And so part of that has to do with just her own personality that she might have developed kind of on her own, but also I think it has to do with the dynamic. If the parents treat her like she's an incompetent doofus, then she tends to maybe act like that, right? Especially if it's a lifetime of being treated that way. So it's tone as well. So you would say to Emily, it's like, I know you can do this. I know you're responsible, and I know this might be hard, but I know you can do it. So I'm setting this date, and I feel like you could probably move out in a month and be okay. Financially, you might have to cut some corners here and there. So the other thing I would talk to the parents about is how much money are you willing to give? Because Emily and Kobe are going to ask for money, or at least they're going to suggest, please give us money so we can, have first month's rent or something. So I'd ask the parents, really, 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 what are you willing to do? And a lot of times what I'd hear from parents, they'd be like, well, we're not going to give her any more money. And I'd be like, so, okay, that's what you want to be your boundary, but what is your actual boundary when the time comes and you're looking at Emily begging and crying and Kobe is like, we need your help, and they screwed up and they can't pay for rent and they're about to be evicted. What's your real boundary there? Because what happens if they get evicted? Does that mean you don't let them back in the house because they didn't pay rent? These are the questions you have to go by. So sometimes what I would do with parents is I would have them say to the kid, this is our boundary. And then I would say, but we know that if she gets evicted, or if it's actually 6 months from now, you're not actually going to evict them. So we won't say this, but we'll work in a one-time second chance, right? That you will give 2 more months, or you will give $3,000. And then you say at that moment, so you really make them work for it. You kind of knew that you would have this other limit that's beyond the stated limit, but you make them work for it, okay? And then when they, demonstrate that they're really trying, they're not just like, hey, I need money, and then you give them money. It's like you really make them work to ask and convince you. And so you say, well, if I give this money, how do I know you're not going to ask me for more money? And then it's just, we're right back where we start. So you really make them work for it. And then you finally give that money over, or you give that extra 2 months, but you say, that's it. I gave you more than enough time to figure this out for yourself. You're smart enough to do this. And I feel like you just think you can always come to mommy and daddy to save you, and I don't think we're actually helping you by that. So I was not going to give you a second chance, but this is the last second chance I'm going to give you. So do not ask me for anything more. Don't ask me for any more time to stay in this house. Don't ask me for any more money. I love you. I'm sorry, but I know you can do this. And if I continue to give in on this, I think I'm actually abusing you because you're a grown human being. So figure it out. And I know you can. You're smart. You're capable. I know things are stressful, but you made your bed. I was trying to get you to be more careful about family planning. I was trying to tell you to be more careful about building a career. You know me. I've been saying that for years. So I don't know what else to do. Figure it out. And I love you, and I'll be there. Now, the other consequence here is that the adult child, if they're particularly impertinent, might be really hurt and angry and might even cut you off and say, well, fine, you're never going to see your grandkids again. And then I would run that by the parents. Like, are you okay? Are you really okay with that? Because if you're not, there's no sense in drawing that boundary if you're just going to give in when that manipulative tactic is used. Now, what I would tell the parents is that doesn't usually last. The Emilys of the world end up, especially if you don't become toxic in your language. If you're just like, I love you, I'm sorry, but me and your mom, we're at our wits' end, and we also know that you can do it. So there's a language in you, because if you're just like, you're a piece of crap kid, then they do have legitimate reason to cut you off from their kids. But if you're nice about it enough, sometimes you even write it out. And then usually the Emilys of the world, after they calm down, will absolutely say, especially once they find success, they're like, oh, actually, I'm glad my parents pushed me in this way. In fact, I mean, in little ways, I'm guessing for y'all, you have this too. I appreciate my parents in this way. I mean, I didn't go through it. I moved out at 18 and never moved back. That was the common thing for Gen X's, I feel like. Anyway, so when I was like 14, 15, 16 or something, my parents came to me and they told me they were stopping buying me sundries, bathroom stuff, shampoo and soap and that kind of thing. I was shocked because to me, that was, just imagine your whole life, your mom always buys you shampoo, and they're like, we're not going to buy that for you anymore. And because I had, I worked, I had a job, and I'm thinking, so I need to go to the store myself and buy my own shampoo? That's weird. And it stung a little bit. It hurt, right? I felt, because one, it's like, so you're transitioning me away from you, which feels kind of bad, not terribly bad. But also, I earned that money with my work, with working at a job. I want to spend it on like things that I want, things that extra things. I was buying a lot of musical equipment at the time, sequencers, drum machines, keyboards, guitars, amps, that kind of stuff, expensive mics, cheap stuff, but not extremely cheap. Anyway, so I was, it was initially bothersome, but it was a transition, right? It was a little bit. They weren't dumping it all at once, right? They were kind of sprinkling in over time, and they had already been doing things probably since I was young, like 5 years old. They were probably already age appropriate transitions to independence, right? And my parents could afford it, right? It's not like they were strapped for cash. My shampoo, I remember it was pert. It was shampoo and conditioner in one. I remember thinking like, wow, that's just one thing. I don't have to do two things. I still do that, by the way. I still have shampoo. Well, mine is like 3-in-1. It's very cheap too. I use like the cheapest shampoo. It's 3-in-1. So I don't know what the third thing is. Shampoo, conditioner, and something else. I don't know. But it's also a giant bottle of it. But so I was given that task, and when I started to actually buy those things, I felt competent. I was like, okay, I can do this, and there were multiple elements like that my parents forced me. In fact, when I was 18 and I was going to University of Washington, it's just a half an hour away from where I grew up, from where I was living with my parents. And at the last minute, I was like, yeah, I think I'll just stay home because my mom makes me meals and she does my laundry, and I don't have to deal with a bunch of random college people. I can just live at home. And my parents are like, nope, you're moving out and you're joining a fraternity, because my my mom and my sister were in a sorority. And so they're like, nope, you're going to UW, you're moving out, and you're joining a frat, and you're not living in the dorms. I remember them saying that. I'm like, huh? Anyway, so I just did that. And again, that kind of hurt, right? I remember thinking, oh, but it definitely was what I needed. I mean, who knows what it would have happened if I would have stayed home, but I think I would have been a different person. I think things really could have gone a lot differently for me in a lot of ways. Now, I'm not saying that you're supposed to do that with all kids. Every kid is different. Every situation is different. But the principle is the same, is you have to start consequencing, right? Because say, for example, there must have been a thought in my parents' mind that, well, if we don't buy him shampoo, what if he doesn't buy shampoo, or he forgets, or he buys the wrong shampoo, and he either hurts himself with the wrong shampoo, or he doesn't have any shampoo and can't bathe himself, doesn't have any soap or anything, and he goes to school having not been able to bathe himself, and he's in a really bad mood, and he doesn't do well in his class because of that, and then his grades start to go down. These are the thoughts that run through parents' minds. And they said, well, we're willing to take that risk. Plus, if you dole these little things out. So when I talk to the parents with adult children like this, I'm like, there's a reason why you step in and help them. It's because there's an actual danger of bad things happening, but you have to be willing to let your child go through that. My parents said, I'm going to let, the fact that they were making me move out of the house is a big thing, right? What if that turns out to be a bad experience for me? And they could have saved me from that by letting me live at home how I wanted to. There's a lot of risk to that, but as a parent, you have to be willing to take that risk for the benefit of having your child grow the F up. So that's it's elaborate, and as you can tell, there's a lot of exploration with the parents in terms of what they want to do and what's realistic, and how to navigate all that. And of course, if I can, I would talk to the Emilys of the world and say similar things. I would just say, what goes through your mind when you think about the fact that your parents are drawing this line? Well, I just feel like it's all going to fail. Why do you assume that? What's going on in your mind? Like, what experiences taught you that you're incompetent, or that you're not capable of things that everyone else in your age group is capable of? Like, well, we have kids. I'd be like, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Like, you can certainly work, or work at home. There's a lot. You start looking is the thing. Start figuring stuff out. So anyway, we also saw just now in which they are both parenting the young child, and he is doing something, and it didn't look like Kobe was doing anything bad as a parent. And Emily, in an exasperated voice, a contemptuous voice, says something like, just leave him alone. And not okay. Even if Kobe was doing something that was inherently bad parenting, which it didn't look like it was, unless it's an emergency, like someone's going to die or have serious bodily harm, in those cases you do want to undermine the other parent. But short of that, which I think that was, one, you don't want to use that tone of voice, because there's a whole slew of problems from that. Two, you want to do it away from the children. So one, her tone of voice is very hurtful and demeaning. And to the Kobes of the world, often what will happen is they will give up. They'll just give up on parenting. They'll be like, okay, well, I guess I'm done because you are micromanaging and contemptuous of me, and I guess I'm an idiot. There's no winning with you. And so I don't want to give up parenting my son, but what else am I supposed to do? We saw this with Asuelu and Kalani. I don't, obviously know what was really happening, but there was a similar dynamic there. Now, the difference is Kobe is not like Asuelu. Kobe is fairly competent and seems to know what's happening. He's still figuring it out. He's basically a brand new parent. Or he is a brand new parent and hasn't been there for the year or so that the child has been developing. But so the tone of her voice could very, very much hurt his feelings, which isn't good. And also over time will erode his motivation to even just be involved with the parenting or in the family. And so a lot of people in Kobe's position, 5 years from now, they're divorced and they don't really even see the kids very often. Now, I don't think Kobe will do that, but you run the risk of that. At the very least, you run the risk of the Kobes of the world pulling back on parenting and just be like, okay, fine, I'll just be in the garage, or I'll be on my computer, or I'll work a lot or something. And then the Emilys of the world are like, how come I'm doing all the parenting by myself? And it's like, well, it's not your fault per se, but you didn't help. So there's that. And the other problem is that to the children, they learn, and some of you I know had parents like this, you learn that, oh, Emily is the real parent and daddy is not the real parent, because daddy never criticizes mommy, but mommy always criticizes daddy, and daddy never really has anything to say back. So mommy is the real parent and daddy's the idiot. And there's so many problems with that. Obviously, it's obvious why that would be damaging. It's abusive, really, to a child, because, well, I won't go into the details, but let's rewatch that a little bit.
Uh-oh. Honey, just let him be.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So it's totally fine to later on say, hey, honey, I just want to talk with you about what was happening earlier. No big deal. Maybe it's a parenting preference. I don't know. But when you're doing this and that, I would have done it this way. What do you think about that? More tentative, right? Instead of this, which is very common, upsettingly common. All right, well, if you want to support what we're doing here on this YouTube channel, you can become a patron of the podcast by clicking the link below or going to patreon.com. When you become a patron, you are really supporting what we're doing here. I would not be able to do any of this if it weren't for the patrons. Thank you for all you patrons who are current patrons, who are also upper tier patrons or annual patrons. That helps us out. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.